Good morning, everyone. We heard in today's gospel a very short but a very powerful message. Jesus said, "Put out into the deep and lower your nets for a catch." This gospel sounds like a good fishing story where Jesus is teaching the disciples how to fish. If we were to give it a title, perhaps we could call it Jesus Outfishes the Fishermen. But today's gospel is not about how to catch a boatload of fish. There is actually a very important sequence when we look carefully at today's gospel. First, the disciples were fishing and caught nothing. Then they went to the shore. Then Jesus saw a large crowd and got into the boat to speak to all of them from the boat. Then, after Jesus finishes teaching the crowds, he continues to teach, but this time focusing on Peter. There are always key words and transitions in the Gospels. When we look at these, we realize that the purpose of this gospel is not to show us how good of a fisherman Jesus was, but rather about the depths that Jesus leads us to when we trust him and when we allow him to work in our lives. Jesus tells Peter, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." An important nuance in today's gospel is that these instructions came from Jesus, but Jesus did not actually lower the nets for Peter. A crucial aspect of our life of faith is first to be attentive to God's will and direction, and then to be confident that the strength to do what we need to do also comes from God. Peter tells Jesus, "Master, the whole night through we have toiled and have taken nothing, but at your word I will lower the net." This shows us the contrast between our weakness and God's great and abundant abilities to do practically everything. The focus is, we have caught nothing, but I will listen to you and I will lower the net. Peter followed Jesus' instructions, and as a result, he received an abundance. He caught so many fish that he had to call for another boat to help him. And even more than this, the two boats caught so many fish and were so full that they both began to sink. Peter himself lowered the nets only because he was listening to the instructions that Jesus gave him and he trusted in them. This shows us that we are weak when we act without God, and that God gives us strength when we accept to follow his instructions. Jesus directs Peter, but does not make the decision for Peter. Therefore, as followers of Jesus, when we realize that our true strength is strength with God, we do not focus on simply getting by in our life. We strive to live an abundant life so that we can see a higher level of beauty in ourselves, in others, and in the world around us. In a speech Pope John Paul II gave, he said, "Do not be afraid. Do not be satisfied with mediocrity, but put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." This confidence and trust is a distinguishing mark of the Christian life. Our goal in life is not simply to survive, but to thrive in everything we're doing. Sometimes you ask some people how they are doing, and what do they say? Surviving. Not bad. Or perhaps one of the worst responses I've ever heard in Arabic is, "Aishin li'illat al-maut," We are alive simply for lack of death. You can't get any less optimistic or more depressing than that. Right? Not quite dead yet. Tattoo that on your forehead. God did not create us simply to survive. If all we can say is that we are alive because we are breathing, then we are living life in the shallow end and not living in the depths that Jesus calls us to. We are not here simply to survive. Our answer should never be not bad, but rather better than I ever imagined is possible. Sometimes you go to a store and the cashier is obviously miserable. At some restaurants, the server simply doesn't care. It is actually, I think, more difficult to be miserable than it is to be happy. It is more difficult to fail than it is to succeed, because when you have low standards, you actually have to live with the pain and the misery of your failure every single day. However, when you reach your potential and succeed, you keep living the joy of your success and benefit from that success in everything that you do. We have to convince ourselves that simply surviving is not why God created us. And this applies to all aspects of our life, regardless of who we are. If we are a student, we are actually wasting our time by simply existing in a classroom. If we are a basketball player who is simply there and doesn't do much more, we will not be part of a team for very long. More specifically, related to our faith, we sometimes think that it is enough to be baptized. Rather, this is only the first step. Actually, we become true Christians only when we live daily the fullness of the Christian life. Also, some think they are married simply because they said, "I do." But this is not enough. You are really married if you keep saying "I do" with great joy to every single challenge that comes your way. Whatever we do, whoever you are, wherever we live, mediocrity is simply not an option for believers in the power of God's love. We need to move beyond the black and white picture of mediocrity and begin to see the full color of life, and then challenge ourselves to go even further, to see things in 3D and to see things in all the beautiful dimensions of God's many and abundant blessings. Be open to the marvelous things that God wants to do in our life, and realize that this is only possible if we believe that God has a wonderful plan for our life. It is also important to realize that this wonderful plan is not only something that we will see in the future, but it is what we are actually doing today. We cannot wait to be in another place, at another job, or with other people to be happy. Happiness is living and appreciating God's gift today, and right now, and right here, and with everything that is around us. Today, we can put ourselves in the boat with Jesus, who tells us, "Put out into the deep and lower your nets for a catch." When Jesus told this to Peter, he responded, "We have toiled all night and have taken nothing." Perhaps today we will answer, "But Jesus, I have been struggling all my life and have not accomplished much. But Jesus, my health is not good. But Jesus, I am not as popular as I want to be. But Jesus, I am not as good in school as I want to be. But Jesus, my marriage is not where I want it to be." And the list can go on with so many other buts. St. Peter reminds us that all these are irrelevant because he responds, but at your word I will lower the net. When we lower our nets in the deep and believe that God is directing us to an abundant catch, it is only then that we will be able to see more of the good things that God has given us in our life, so that we can say, I appreciate the health that I have, and I'm going to work harder at taking better care of it. I appreciate the talents I have, and I'm going to work harder at getting better. I appreciate my friends, and I'm going to work harder to become myself a better friend. I appreciate my wife, husband, children, and family, and I am going to do something more to show them just how much I love them. Above all, I am going to rejoice every day at the blessings that God has given me to live in the deep. We are constantly placing our nets in the deep in order to avoid the shallowness and mediocrity of failure. When we do this, we discover that life can be seen in full color and in 3D, and that the intensity of our life is only dependent on responding to God's direction. And the strength that He has given us to keep moving from deep to deeper, that helps us to move from joy to greater joy, and that helps us to move from faith to abundance of faith and abundance of confidence in Him.